The mountains have been calling to me since I was a young boy. It started when my father would take his 3 sons backpacking in the Catskills. No tent. We would sleep under the stars on a tarp. From where we lived, we had an excellent view of the northern escarpment of the Catskills. As a teen, I would sit on the stone walls among the fields, mesmerized by the dark blue silhouette of the mountains against the sky. And now at age 64, and having climbed all 115 4,000-foot peaks and above in the Northeast, I find myself on Vermont's Long Trail. I was fortunate in the early days of my hike to meet 3 other northbounders, Pippi, Badger, and Breaks. We would hike the next 11 days together. Breaks and I decided to end our hikes at Middlebury Gap and finish in 2025. Pippi and Badger continued on, going over Jay Peak in 10 inches of snow the same day they reached the border. I resumed my hike this year on September 21st from Middlebury Gap. Breaks couldn't make it this year. This northern section for me would be solo. I would miss the companionship of my trail family. I camped at Emily Proctor the first night with a trickle for a water source. The weather was absolutely stunning. I felt very fortunate to be hiking the Long Trail. Camped at Cooley Glen the second night with a 73-year-old psychologist, trail name yet to be. We would meet again at the Montclair Glen Lodge and on the summit of Camel's Hump. The third night was the Battelle shelter. I met Matt and Andrew, GMC workers, building the new shelter. I shared chicken fingers that I had packed out from Bristol. They were still warm. Kate and I, another northbounder, stayed in the old shelter. The next day was cool and misty for the hike to App Gap. This section reminds me a lot of the Smoky Mountains with its dark spruce forests covered with moss, the fog adding to the effect. Just as trees communicate with each other underground, sharing resources, the forest seems to communicate with our bodies, giving us what we need. The smell of the balsam, the moist mountain air, calmed me and refreshed me. Breaks was meeting me at App Gap to take me into Waitsville to stay. It would rain over 3 inches the next 2 days, the first substantial rain Vermont had seen in over 2 months. The effect of the rain on the forest and the water sources was very noticeable. The trail was wet again, like the Long Trail should be, but it wouldn't last. It wouldn't rain again for the next 10 days of my hike. However, the colors were vibrant, as if the forest was smiling. The skies cleared and the cloud formations were amazing, going up over burnt rock. I didn't mind the climb up. Again, I felt very fortunate. But descending the north side of burnt rock, with the rocks wet, was a treacherous descent. On the way to Montclair Glen Lodge, the clouds opened up and soaked me for the last mile to the shelter. I didn't mind. With burnt rock behind me, I welcomed it, and so did the forest. The talk in the shelter that night was, of course, Camel's Hump. September 27th dawned cloudy and dark with fog. As I'd made my way to the summit, it began to break up, though. Yet to be waved to me, and I held up my poles in the air. There wasn't much time for lunch, though. I was meeting Pippi at Route 2, and I had 10 miles to go. The long trail has a way of beating you up and then almost apologetically bring you into a fern-filled glen with ancient boulders covered in beautiful greenery, as if it was designed by a master florist, and soothe your weary body. I had heard that the descent off of Camel's Hump was brutal. When I finally made it to the Winooski River, I can tell you, they weren't lying. Thanks to Pippi, I stayed at the Little River State Park after eating as much chili and chicken fingers as I could. In the morning, she took me back to Trailhead with a breakfast sandwich and more coffee. September 28th was a beautiful day. I had my work cut out for me, up and over Bolton Mountain, with an ascent of more than 4,000 feet in 9.8 miles. For me, after Camel's Hump the day before, this was a tough climb. The comments about there being no view at the summit are hysterically funny. Heading down the backside of Bolton, I got a great view of Mansfield. It was hard to comprehend. I would be going over it tomorrow, all the way to Route 108 in Smuggler's Notch. I arrived at the puffer shelter about dinner time. A fellow northbounder, Peter from Lake Placid, was at the shelter. The sunset and sunrise in the morning were one of the highlights of the entire hike. I had heard the long trail is stingy on views, but the difficult terrain causes you to slow down and to look closer, more deeply, into the forest, to notice the intricate detail. Oftentimes, the views are the forest itself. The climb up the forehead of Mansfield with a full pack put me to the test. With its ladders and exposure over boulders, more than once I told myself, don't slip. I had climbed Mount Mansfield before. October 8th, 2022 comes to mind. Winter-like conditions are always possible. The contrast with the foliage was unforgettable. But I would have sunny, hot weather for my ascent today. With the crowds, it's easy to forget that the summit of Mansfield is a rare and sacred place. When I finally stood there, to my surprise, I was alone. My brother, who lives in Vermont, picked me up at Route 108 and treated me to pizza, IPAs, a shower, laundry, and a warm bed. I can't thank them enough. After what, for me, were the hardest 43 miles of the entire hike. In the morning, my brother dropped me back off at Route 108 after coffee and a breakfast sandwich, and I packed out a turkey and stuffing sandwich just for lunch on Madonna Peak. I hiked the side trail to Elephant's Head for an amazing view of the Notch. I stayed at the Whiteface shelter. 2 northbounders came in late, Vegas and GT, after a 25-mile day with over 6,000 feet of gain. Both had hiked the AT before, and Vegas had just finished the Pacific Crest Trail this month. Pippi was meeting me at Route 15 to take me into Jeffersonville to get my resupply. We also enjoyed one of the local espresso shops. I would be staying at Nye's Green Valley Farm, a delightful 1800s farmhouse, hiker-friendly, with a ride into Jefferson for burgers and breakfast in the morning. Marcia is a wonderful host. Marcia dropped me off early at the trailhead after blueberry pancakes, eggs, toast, and coffee. It was chilly with frost on the grass. The sun shone through the trees against the huge rocks. I crossed the Lamoille River, a defining moment on the long trail. Here the terrain would change dramatically to easier, rolling mountains. The crows were putting on a show, their raucous laughter showcasing their acrobatics. I could hear the wind in their wings as they glistened in the sun. Walking through Devil's Gulch was like taking a step back in time to some primeval place, forgotten by man, rarely visited by the sun. I had lugged water up to Mount Belvedere to spend the night. I had the mountain to myself. I climbed the fire tower multiple times in the wind to get the best sunset pictures. It was a moment I will treasure, and the absolute highlight of an amazing journey. The next day, I made it by the hornets that had been making a name for themselves all summer and fall on Haystack Mountain. It was another hot day going over Jay Peak. A southbounder had mentioned to me that the snack bar was open. That was all the motivation I needed to get up that mountain. I had a feast and packed out dinner. The views were amazing. I would stay the last night on trail at the Lower Woodward shelter. As I did on my first night on trail, I would have the shelter to myself. You could see Jay Peak rising up through the trees. This night would be a quiet time of reflection. Badger graciously came out and hiked the final miles to the border with me. I love my trail family. They made my hike possible. And my sister, who drove me to the trailhead and then gave me a ride home at the end. As I sat on Belvedere Mountain in complete silence, for one night and one morning the summit was mine as I watched the day begin. With only 2 days left to the Canadian border and the end of a 272-mile journey, I thought how quickly time moves on. I wanted to slow the sun so that I could make the moment last longer, but it continued to race skyward. The long trail had left its mark on me. It had reawakened in me a beckoning I had heard so long ago. It created a longing in my heart for more, more of its magic, and more of its lonely, silent call.